right, we're going to get started here in just a little bit. Let everybody get logged in. Oh, there's Ed. He made it. All right. Who's that? It looks like we got a bunch of people logging in here real quick. All right, very exciting. Okay. Well, as everybody's logging in, I want to go ahead and welcome you all to Webinar Wednesday, whether you're on the West Coast or the East Coast. I'm either saying good morning or good afternoon to you all. Today, we're really excited. We are going to be talking about waste in construction. It's more than just trash. Dave Burley has just joined us as a strategic partner here at Shin Consulting and will be partnering with us on estimating services. He's an expert in that field, so we're really excited to have him part of our organization. He's going to be also working closely with Ed Hauk. So we're excited to be sharing with you guys today. However, before we get started, I do like to cover a few housekeeping items. Down at the bottom of your screen, you'll notice that there is a Q&A bubble. Please feel free to ask questions throughout the program. I will reserve your questions until the end to maintain the flow of the webinar, but please hang on till the end and we'll get those questions answered. If you have questions about the Zoom program or some logistical issues or just questions in general that are directed specifically to me moderating the meeting for you, you can talk to me directly through the chat. That is the other speech bubble down at the bottom. That's a single speech bubble, and then you can send a message directly to me and I can help do some troubleshooting with you on in the background if need be. If you are needing to ask any questions directly to Dave at the close of the webinar, you're going to be getting an email from us tomorrow thanking you for joining us, and it will have his email information, and I'm sure we'll have that for you at the end as well. But in case you aren't unable to get all that information down, you can grab it then. We are also recording the webinar today, so if you'd like to revisit the information that's shared today, you can go to our website and watch this recording and many others. So with that, I'm going to pass this on over to Dave Burley to go ahead and get started on waste in construction.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Jane.
Thanks, Dave.
So today we want to cover just very high level. We want to talk about waste. Specifically, waste isn't just what we find in our dumpsters. A lot of times that's kind of what we define waste as, is the stuff that's being thrown away. And that's not entirely true. My company, Boat Virtuosos, we define waste as any material that's above and beyond the minimum required amount to complete any given task. And we take that waste and we break it into 3 different categories as we're reviewing waste programs. And those are required waste, visible waste, and hidden waste. Required waste is the material that we have to have above and beyond the minimum. This is typically, we're thinking of things like extra studs. We know that we may need 334 studs to build a home, but we also know that some of those studs are going to be twisted. They're going to have too big of knots in them. There's going to be some miscuts. Things are going to happen that we know that we do need some additional studs to actually complete the job. Another good place that we look at required waste is in flooring, tile and wood flooring specifically, because of the way that we have to make all these cuts to get our perimeters done or any certain patterns, then now we do need some additional tile than what we think it needs to be had so that we can get that job completed. And another great example of this is exterior trim, in that we can't just take lineal measurements of exterior trim and call that good, because we want to reduce our splices in any of our interior and exterior trim. So we do have some required waste to be able to get the results that we're looking for. With required waste, some things that we can do differently is today, most people, when we're doing tile or wood flooring, we're just doing an area of the room with a waste factor. We can actually take that a step farther by actually doing flooring layouts. And I'm not saying layout like here's the bathroom and you put a T in it and show where the break is. Not that type of layout. I'm saying let's actually lay out the tile. Let's figure out what direction we're going to lay it in, where we're going to start it from, so that we can then determine how much tile do we actually need to get that room done, while still considering a modest additional waste factor for cuts. We have to round to case sizes. We're going to have some chips, cracks, etc. If you do this method, if you actually do your flooring layouts, you're going to find that generally speaking, you're going to get a lower waste factor than you're using today. Pretty much average right now from the customers that we deal with, most people are running a 10% waste factor on flooring. That's generally a little high. When we do flooring layouts, we're usually averaging somewhere between about the 3 to 5% is what's actually required to get the job done. As a caution, you will see times that number actually increases. You may have a bathroom that your true requirement is a 12% waste factor. But I would ask that when people run into those, we also need to take into account if we've been running a flat 10% this whole time, and we know that we have some rooms that are going higher than that 10% is what's actually required to get the job done, then we should also be able to recognize we're probably paying a little more on our square footage also, because our trade partner is making sure that on top of the waste factor, they're still covered for those things. And we also want to make sure that for required waste, that we're utilizing our scopes to make sure that everyone knows what are our policies on how to deal with materials and what's allowed for damage. All too often our scopes are pretty thin and not really getting into great enough detail to say what percentage of material has been allocated for damages, for miscuts, for things like that. By not spelling those out, we're just putting ourselves on the hook for all this additional required waste, versus really getting that documented with our trade partners on what amount of extra material is being allocated to cover those things that are going to happen on the job site. We want to scope out our expectations, specifically on things like cuts. We want to make sure that we have a signature on paper that says you're always going to cut a piece from the closest size piece that you have. We've all been on job sites and seen somebody cutting off an 18-inch piece of 2x4, and they're always grabbing a brand new 12 or 14 or 16 footer to do that when there's scraps laying on the ground that could have just as easily been used, so that we can reduce that amount of required waste. Our visible waste, our second category, this is the stuff that's really easy to see. Typically, this is what we see going into dumpsters, the waste laying around all over the job site, or things being hauled off by our trade partners. It's a unique type of waste in that not only are you paying for the material that's being wasted, but that's also being factored into your disposal costs. So as we're paying for our dumpsters, whether you pay per month or per haul or per ton or whatever method you use in your market, there is an additional cost that comes in because we're allowing all of this waste to be carted off that way. When we talk about waste with our trade partners, visible waste is generally what we're actually discussing. This is the waste that we're saying, hey, on roofing, I'm going to give you a 10% waste factor because I know you're going to cut shingles and they're going to wind up on the ground. That's really the easiest way to think about the visible waste. And waste, when we're talking to trade partners, is that's generally what we're discussing is the visible aspect of it. To reduce visible waste, the first thing we always suggest is we want to move away from using flat waste factors on anything that has waste built in. So if any customer that I call, I can say, hey, what's your waste factor on drywall? And everyone has an answer for me. It's 5%, it's 10%, it depends on the market. But we want to move away from using those flat waste factors all the time. And drywall is a great example of why we should do that. Normal estimating standards for drywall say you take all of your wall area, it includes doors and windows, and any opening that's under 3 feet, the drywall actually stays in there, even though that drywall is going to be cut and could be used in closets and fill-in pieces, stuff like that. But what happens is a lot of times we'll do the estimate that way, and then we still add a waste factor onto the top of that, not taking into account we already had waste built in when we did our estimate. So now, even though we think, hey, I have a 5% waste factor with this trade partner on drywall, once I factor in my doors and my windows and my openings, I'm probably closer to 10% or even higher than 10% on our drywall. So we want to use those as we're talking with our trade partners and make sure that they understand that there's additional waste that was already built in. And if we want a 5% waste factor, we're trying to max out at that 5%. So I need to account for the waste I had built in already. Exterior trim is another great area with waste. All too often, it's the exterior trim times a 5 to 10% waste factor. But the reality of the situation is when we're cutting this trim, we can reuse parts of that trim onto an adjacent window. If we have a 3-foot window and we cut a 12-foot piece, I need to try to reuse that waste into another application. So when we're doing our estimates, we should be doing the same thing. It's not just as simple as tracing that trim and figuring out what my total footage is. We actually need to take a few extra seconds to say, okay, so if I put my 3-foot top here and my 3-foot bottom there, I can move the rest of the stick into this next window opening so that we're becoming as tight as we can on that visible waste. We also want to make sure that as you're doing your estimating, that your trade partners understand what your standards are. We don't want to just give them a number of how many sheets of drywall. We want them to understand how we did it, that we left doors and windows in, that we left any opening under 3 feet in. So we have that waste already built in, so that then we're talking about the actual extra waste in what they need to cover any damage or anything like that. If we don't have these conversations with our trade partners and just say, hey, on drywall, you're 5% today, I'm cutting you down to 2%, and we don't explain how we came about being able to do that and what the actual amount of unused or unspoken for drywall is at the beginning of the job, we're dooming ourselves for failure. We need to make sure that all of our trade partners understand what the standards are, how specifically do we do our estimate, how do we do our calculations, so that they can understand that, that we're creating a fair program for them as well. Hidden waste, our third category. This is the one that we generally don't consider at all. And hidden waste is any waste that's left in a home after completion, and you can't really see it. This is generally between layers of surfaces, including sheathing and drywall. Extra framing material is the biggest cause of our hidden waste. We don't really think of it as waste because we walked the finished home, it never went in the trash. We never saw it just laying around the job site. But we do likely have material hidden in those walls that we didn't actually need to have. So we did increase our cost of the home by allowing that material to be in there. To address hidden waste, we again really want to use scopes. Our scope of work should address those common areas. This includes, we want to define how our studs are used with details. We don't want to just say we use California corners. We want to have details that show what our expectations are. For instance, we have a lot of parts of the country still that refer to 3 stud corners. And if you hear the term 3 stud, you're assuming 3 additional studs. A lot of framers that we speak to across the country, that's what they allocate. A 3 stud corner means I need 3 studs. The reality of the situation is 2 of those studs were already there. They were the ends of our walls. So we really only needed 1 additional stud to get that job done, but we used a vague term, did not include a detail. So we wound up getting 2 additional studs for every one of those corners. And let's say we have 15 of those corners on our home. Now we have 30 additional studs that we purchased that went into the home even though they weren't needed. We want to make sure that for windows, we have details of how to frame the windows. All too often, after estimating is done for framing, and then we look at the VPOs on a job and go do job walks to find out what happened, why did we need additional material. Windows is a common area where we find extra studs that weren't required again. And every time that happens, it comes back to, well, there was nothing that showed me how to frame that window. So we want to have a generic detail that shows how do you frame windows so that everyone knows you have counted for the material required to frame that window, and you have not accounted for any framing detail outside of what you've provided. We also want to take our framing into mind when we're designing the plan. So a lot of our hidden waste and studs comes from where we put our windows and doors. We can often find that had we shifted a window or door an inch or 2 one way or another, we could have reduced a stud in doing so. So we want to try to emphasize we need to take that into account up front and do our designs with our openings in a way that's maximizing that framing opportunity. At the same time as we're doing our designs, we want to pay attention to room sizes. All too often, as Ed and I work on plan reviews with some of our clients, we find room sizes that had we went just a couple inches smaller in one direction, not only would we have possibly reduced a stud, more importantly, we have the ability to reduce on our rafters, downsize on our rafters, even get a wider on center from the rafters. And it's very important that we make sure that as we're designing these homes, we're taking that into account. What are those breaking points that cause us to have to increase material usage? And are we really getting anything for that increase in size? With hidden waste, it's important to remember that it begins at concept. So from the first time that we lay out the concept of that home, all the way through closing, we have to be diligent with that hidden waste. We need to make sure it's designed to maximize the material. Then as it's being framed, we need to make sure that we're not wasting that material, that our corner details match what we put on our plans and our scopes, that our windows and door openings and everything's being framed the way that we require it, instead of allowing the framer to take a little bit of artistic freedom and frame the house the way that they would like to. So builder partnerships in Boak Virtuosos, again, the company that I am with, we've created a strategic partnership to help you understand the different waste reduction programs. In addition to helping educate you, we also have the ability to help you get your estimating off the ground in 3D modeling to even further improve how accurate your designs are. And we really want to help you guys hone in and really rein in your current waste. As we continue to see costs just creep up higher and higher on a virtually daily basis at this point, waste is an area that we can rein in quickly and actually get you some savings, let you start to drop the cost of your homes without affecting quality, without beating up your trade partner for how much you're paying per piece or per stick or per square or anything like that. Waste is an area that you can get some control over, working with your trade partners to lower those costs and get an immediate result from that. If you guys have any questions, I'm going to have Em and Jane pop back on. And also, please reach out to Builder Partnerships if you'd like to have any further discussion around what waste looks like in your particular operation and what you could be doing or should be looking at to try to get that under control.
All right, so we do have one question so far. Dave, thank you so much. That was wonderful. So many good points to consider when you are looking at waste, especially the ones that are hidden that nobody sees and are behind the walls after you're done building. Our first question is, what takeoff services do you offer?
So we have two different services that we offer. Our first is a 2D quantity takeoffs, where we can take a PDF, a DWG or DWF, and quantify the quantities of your stick and brick items. The second is we also offer a 3D version where we take your plan and redesign it into 3D so that we can actually get a 3D framing model, 3D model of how to use the drywall, the shingles, etc. And in both of those services, we start with sticks and bricks. That's the main thing we generally focus with all of our clients. But we do have the ability, if you have certain trades that are your finished trades or kind of a thorn in your side, then we can certainly discuss creating a program that fits your market that would address those items that are outside of the typical stick and brick.
So Dave, this is Ed Houck. As you were talking, I was looking through some notes on clients that you and I have worked with. A couple things that you went as you were going through were having, good plans, good details, good scopes of homes, good scopes of work for the trades. And the other two things that we see all the time is we don't walk homes and then we don't hold trades accountable. Tell them about how important it is to really have good plans in order to get the proper estimate.
Yeah, so your estimate is only as good as your plans. If your plans don't have details in them, we're going to do the same thing your trade partner is going to do, and that's call you and say, hey, what are you doing here? And hopefully we have an answer to what you're doing, because that's the way we're going to estimate it. The problem with that, though, is Ed can call me and I can say, this is how I do this. But then he's going to go walk the job and can see that my 5 different framers each do it a different way. So my estimate was really only good for the one framer that did it the way that Ed thought they did it. And the other 4 kind of take their own leisure there. The second part of that is that in an estimate, we're ultimately after a bill of quantities. And the bill of quantities is only accurate if it's done the way that the plans and details say to build the home, and if your trade partner builds the home the way the plans and the details say to build the home. If there's any gray area in there, then that bill of quantities starts to lose its integrity as soon as we allow people to interpret the plan or the details.
That's when we start calling them guidelines, not plans, right?
Yes.
And all too often we find that simple things like the joist layout, well, that's coming later from the supplier, or the truss layout, that's coming later. We really preach that in order to give Dave the opportunity to give you the 100% correct estimate, you need to have the best plans and details. It doesn't matter whether it's Dave's team doing it or you're doing it yourself. You really have to have the good plans and 100% complete plans in order to get the right estimate out.
Yep.
Any other questions? That was a great presentation. So many great things to think about too. Ed, I know you guys have worked with a lot of builders who don't have complete plans or haven't really thought through all the pieces that you guys have talked about today, and you guys get in there and make a big difference. Looks like we have another question. This is from Rick. He says, how do we solve the fact that single-family residential CDs and SOWs lack sufficient details for the trades or suppliers compared to non-res builders / projects?
Very good point. And as we walk houses, I was in a builder's office a few weeks ago. The first floor was framed different from the second floor. What I would say is just start from somewhere. Dave just mentioned a simple thing like 3 stud corners. These corners we're talking about now that lumber is going crazy are very expensive. Just start somewhere with pictures of all these things. There are good books available on framing details. Work with your architect. One of my favorite things is I want to create my own set of details, my company's plan details. I like them in the back of the set, maybe in a book, but I want to be able to reference it. And the builder I was with just recently is now trying to do their details and add Spanish to it. Again, start out with pictures. How do I frame a window? To Dave's point, is a 6-foot window in my world is double stud, double jack. How are they framing every single one? It matters how intersecting corners happen. Are you doing 3 studs? Are you doing cross blocking? The list goes on and on, even down to like Dave did a great flooring plan a couple of weeks ago and showed me. If you're not following that flooring plan, you're going to end up short of your material. And the first thing happens when we go tight like this, Dave does a great estimate. And if we're not walking in the homes and working with the trades and holding them accountable, one thing I'm going to tell you right now is going to be guaranteed is you're going to be short. Most times the trades, if they're supplying material themselves, they're fat. And we get snowblind in material and we end up stepping over material, tripping over material. And to Dave's point, I paid for it to be delivered. I paid for it to be installed. Now I'm paying for it to be hauled away. So it starts out with find a way. And by the way, depending on if you're using an outsourced architect, a lot of times they've got a starting point already created on standard details. So try that. If it's in-house, get your production manager, superintendent yourself, go out and start taking pictures, draw, edit on the pictures what you want, and just start creating the library. Dave, thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it's definitely important to be on the site as often as possible. We can have the best quantities, we can have the best details, we can do everything right, but if we're not verifying that all of those things are being followed, then we're not giving ourselves any help in the process at all. Especially as we push to get tighter and tighter and tighter to control these costs. It's important, one, to see that it's actually happening. Two, it's also important to make sure that it's feasible, that detail that we drew or that new process that we took into account to help with waste, we want to make sure that it's not only being achieved, but it is actually achievable. Because if it's something that can't happen, then obviously we need to address that issue. But it really every single time comes back to our plans had to be right. That's our first step all the time, is making sure that the plans are right. And then we want to make sure that we've defined how to do things. It's in my past as a purchasing director for some of the nationwide builders, we found that having clear expectations on waste and miscuts and all of these things was extremely critical, so that it got us out of the situation or got us the ability to say, I'm not going to approve that VPO because that's not on us. We as the home builder did not cause that issue. We gave you a good plan. We gave you the right quantities. You fell outside of the realm of what you were supposed to do. So that's now something that I need to pass on to you instead.
Agreed. And that's where I say walking the homes and holding the trades accountable is key. Framers, for example, Dave had a very good point. They love cutting new boards. They love it. They don't like cutting boards that were already cut once. I don't know why. If you ever see the framer with a cutting table set up at the end of the lumber pile, and your lumber pile scrap is bigger than your lumber pile, there might be a problem.
Yeah, and I think it's important that we take into account that in today's day and age, now as a purchasing agent or manager, director, whatever, I don't always even have to physically go out to a job site to see it. I can't say I'm too busy to do this. We have FaceTime, we have Zoom, we have the Matterport cameras. There's all these different technologies at our fingertips now, that I can be doing frame walks while sitting in my office. There's definitely no longer any reason to say I couldn't make it out to walk that home. Technology's made it so much easier for us to really keep tabs on what's happening in the field.
Yeah, good point, Dave. I mean, a lot of it is when a couple of weeks ago I was on site. I gave Dave a plan to get an estimate done, and then when I got out there, I found out the plan was incomplete for Dave to do the estimate. On top of it, like I said, first to second floor, each framer was on the house had different styles of framing things. So you've got to get out there, know exactly how you're supposed to build it, how it was estimated, and then hold that trade accountable. Like I said, I had a framer years ago. He loved cutting up long boards into short boards. The framer a couple of weeks ago, not his fault because he didn't have the joist plan. He was pulling joists off the pile and ended up like 18 joists short. Why was that? Well, he wasn't given the proper plan. So without that, they're kind of just winging it on their own. And by the way, you're dropping $50,000 on the ground and then telling the framer, have fun. And in the end, can't understand why you've got $3,000 of variances. Everything Dave just outlined, including walking your homes and holding people accountable, is how you reduce those costs.
Okay, I have two questions. One real quick, and I feel like you've kind of covered this, but this is going to be very specific to what you guys have been talking about. Do you think plans for trim are necessary or good? We are working on getting so granular with our plans so as to include trim detail for shelving, etc. That's from Anthony.
Anthony, I'll go first and let Dave comment. If you have some extensive trim in a house, including shelving, there's nothing wrong with having a standard detail. So first of all, whoever's doing the estimate, like if you don't tell Dave how to estimate it, it's what's in his head. And and I give it to the trimmer, it's in his head. And by the way, those two probably are not the same. So I agree with you without going overly crazy on it, but I have to have at least, okay, I'm installing a door. Okay, I'm assuming trim on both sides. That's okay, I got that. But why can't I have details on some of these things? Crown molding, two-piece crown. There's 100 different ways of doing two-piece crown. So the better builders have the better details on the plan. And once you have standardized details, it's not that hard. Dave, thoughts on that?
Yeah, so definitely agree with that, Ed. I'd go a step further. we often find closets are kind of the really sticking point. There are 9 million different ways to build out your closet system. And it is not only helpful from an estimating standpoint, but very helpful from your trim carpenter standpoint too, to know exactly how you wanted that framed. Where are your supports going? When are you using vertical supports? Are you putting any sort of a facing material on it? To spell all that stuff out, one is going to make sure your quantities are super accurate. Two, it's going to make sure that your trim carpenter knows what to do with it. Trim always is a little weird one, especially with closets, and that in my 17 years of doing this, I've never seen a trim carpenter cut a piece of shelf in bedroom 2 and carry it to bedroom 3. I don't know what the issue is, but we got into this mode of each room is an independent room for closets, which the details help spell that out. But then we do need to go a step further to make sure that everyone understands, hey, when you cut off that 2 feet from an 8-foot piece of MDF, the extra 6 feet's being used. It needs to leave the room and go to where it goes. But trim is one that we definitely see much better success if there's trim details that go with the quantities versus just handing off the quantities and hoping for the best that the trim carpenter understood how you intended to frame out that closet or how you intended to do your 2-piece crown, etc.
So one other thing to add to that, Dave, is I was with the builder last week and we were talking about trades and holding trades accountable and the schedules. If everything Dave just described, if that trimmer, because he didn't follow how I did the estimate, is short. By the way, most trims could be anywhere from 2 to maybe 4 days. You don't have a whole lot of time to react. A lot of production homes, that trim might be a 2-day house. And then at the end of that second day, you don't have time to react. So what are you doing? You're running around panicking, trying to find material for that trimmer. So that's why it's important to have the right estimate. And to me, it's not very hard to have trim details for standardized things. A lot of houses have got a lot of different packages these days. Maybe it's a Craftsman package. And every builder is different. So every time that trimmer shows up, you do things differently than somebody else. If you don't tell them what your standard is, you're leaving it up to interpretation, which usually means variance.
Excellent. Thank you, guys. I
hope we answered the question.
You're getting questions as you guys are talking. There's more and more questions that are coming out of it. So Scott is asking, for smaller builders with less influence or reputation, what has your experience been with getting subs who are actually willing to comply with higher standards like we're discussing?
So in my old, go ahead, Dave, you go first this time.
Yeah, so if anyone's ever seen me speak at anything else, I always say the same thing. And it definitely applies to smaller builders. Those trade partners that are going to give you the most grief at the beginning of this process are going to be the ones that like it the most 6, 12, however many weeks down the road. Because typically as a small builder, you're also probably using a lot of the smaller trade partners in your market as well. These are the guys that don't have the staff to sit there and estimate these things out with all the individual parts and pieces to fine detail. They've learned how to kind of just quickly look at things and give you a number or a quantity that generally works. By helping, you're really helping alleviate the burden from them by doing that work for them up front and then giving them the tools of how to make that work so that they're not burdened with the behind the scenes. Your trim guy's job is to go trim the house. We don't need him spending all this time and resources behind the scenes figuring out how to trim your house because ultimately you're paying for all that time that's happening. So we've had a lot of success in seeing that over time, people do adopt to it. They like it. But I won't lie to you. I'll tell you straight up that in the beginning, you're going to have a lot of people that are going to push back on you. And we have to be prepared to have those conversations in the reassurance and for them to understand why this is good for them.
Dave, as usual, I agree with you. I was at a Builder 20 group 2 weeks ago, or last week, I guess it was, and we talked about that. They were all smaller volume builders, and Dave's good estimate and good details means that that trimmer in this case is going to show up, do his job, and be the builder of choice. Even a small volume builder can be the builder of choice. I just have to have the right materials and the right details on site, and they'll respond because you're helping them make money. So whether you're a large volume builder or small volume builder, my opinion, Dave and I both agree. I think once you work with them, and by the way, a lot of it is walking the homes, being there with them, and holding them accountable as well as yourself. That's how you will become the builder of choice, whether you're small volume or large volume.
And we have a comment from Wes that says, if you don't have standards, you will find it impossible to hire new subs without a host of issues and misunderstandings. So at the end of the day, regardless of whether or not you get a little pushback at the beginning, it's going to end up paying off in the end.
Wes, I agree with you, buddy.
Thank you for your comment, Wes. We have a question from Ruby. I walk the sites, but what is the best way to word it for the builders to communicate it to the trades?
You want to go first this time, Dave, or is it my turn?
I think it's your turn, Ed.
My turn. So I still build. Tomorrow I'll be on site with trades. I like going out, talking to my trades, approach them. I don't care if we don't speak the same language. You got to learn how to approach and communicate with them. My trimmer in my market, while we're just picking on trimmers for a little while, my trimmer in my market, most of the crew are Russians. About a third of them speak English and a third don't. Find a way to communicate to them in whatever language it is. My framer is Hispanic. I have a great time with them. Find a way to go up, approach them, be polite, treat them like you like being treated. Walk up, have a nice conversation with them. Again, it's just a matter of how you treat them. I find in most cases, to me, trades are kind of like a Labrador Retriever. They want to do a good job. It's just how you treat them and train them. I know that sounds pretty demeaning, but that's what it is. They're very friendly and they want to please.
Yeah. So for me, in my purchasing past, I found pictures to be a great way to communicate. So when I would go and do my frame walks, I would take pictures of anything I saw that didn't match my details or that contradicted my scopes, because I always think it's very important as you're communicating with your superintendent or with your trade partner is, hey, here's the detail, here's the scope, here's what I actually saw on the field. I feel like you're going to get a lot more bandwidth if you have those real life examples. Another thing I always like to do, and I'm going to pick on trim carpenters for a minute also again, is if I saw something wrong in a home, I'd like to go find a similar home and see it there also. Because we're often going to find, and this is a huge cause of expense as we come into closing, is our model may show something done the way that trim carpenter did it, but now Ed's house is about to close and his was done differently. So I like to get a couple of examples when I'm doing those walks to make sure that I can communicate. Here's what it looks like when it's done right. Here's what it looks like in this particular home. Here's where the details showed you how you should have done it to try to close that loop.
And Dave, we talked about this before, even small volume builders, start out with a picture book. I mean, it's easy. Here's how I frame a window. Here's how I trim. So by the way, my past was as a carpenter, as a framer and a trimmer. There's a lot of different ways to trim a window. If I don't tell the trimmer how I'm doing it, is it picture frame? Is there a window sill? How do you do it? Get your best details and start out with pictures. You can hire a relatively inexpensive drafts person and create that picture detail book. So the pictures are worth 1,000 words, by the way. If I'm walking up to somebody who doesn't speak my language, is by the way, get over it. That's the way we're going. I have no problem, to Dave's point, showing them this is how I do it. Have it on your iPad, have it on your phone. Just approach the trades. And to me, I have no problem talking with trades. They're very friendly. And again, I think they want to do it. But keep in mind, we're picking on trimmers today, but that trimmer's working for 10 other builders. That's 10 different ways that he's being told how to do it. Help him out.
Yep. Excellent. Thanks, guys. We have a question here from Ryan. Assuming our framer is cutting only uncut studs, how can you get them to change?
Ryan, by the way, at $10 a stud, every lineal foot of a 2x4 is $1. So back about a year ago, the framers really didn't want to hear about the cost of material. Again, is communicate. Every one of those pieces is literally $1. Every lineal foot of a 2x4. It's crazy. So my thing is just communicate that, hey guys, see all these. If you went to a panel plant, by the way, there's piles of material that are for the cripples or whatever. Even when you're cutting the jacks in, when you're cutting a jack in, you're still pulling off another 14 inches of a stud. Throw that into a pile and try to teach them how to start pulling from that pile. And then once they when Dave does a tight lumber list, the first thing you're going to find out is they're going to be short. It's going to take about 3 to 5 houses to get them to understand Dave's list is tight. So it's communicate and work with them. Dave, thoughts?
Yeah, so it's also the biggest way to get them to understand. Step one is to just explain it, like Ed said. So that first house that you go and walk and you see that happening is explain the cost implications of that decision. Two is, and I know we all hate to I guess not, I probably have mostly purchasing people on the call with me. So purchasing folks love to back charge. At some point, we do have to have that discussion of if you're not going to follow what we said, then you are responsible for this material. I have, in my career, as we've rolled out these programs and really tried to tighten the clamps, generally you are going to have to do a couple of back charges to prove the point. But you're probably not going to back charge that vendor more than once or twice before it becomes painfully clear that one, you're not messing around, that you said you weren't responsible for it and you're not. And two, they're going to start to follow your details and your guidelines because now there's a financial implication for them as well. As long as they don't feel the burden of the money, they're not going to take it as serious as they should, because that's your pocketbook that's paying for it. So you may get mad about it, but if you're not going to really enforce it, they may not take you very seriously until you do.
So Dave, to agree with that, I had a framer years ago that always grabbed the long lengths of LVLs and Paralamps, cut them up into small pieces, and then be in a panic because now he can't set his garage header and it's going to hold him up. So two things. First was a warning shot. The second time I held him accountable. And then I started making him drive to the lumberyard and go get it himself. So eventually
He got
they
it.
learned.
Yeah.
They got it. My first instinct isn't to back charge. My first was you get the warning shot over the bow and then let them know. The other thing is a whole nother subject is, and we've covered this, I think, before one of the other webinars, is on lumber. Like I said, you're dropping $50,000, $60,000, $70,000 on the ground. Do you have a scope of work for your lumberyard, how that's being delivered? If you don't, all that sill plate's on the bottom. And I have a $50,000 pile of lumber. First of all, you probably didn't count it in the first place. The only people I know that take 50 grand don't count it. But it's dropped on the ground, but you didn't tell the framer how it's packaged. So there's a couple things. I want to hold those framers accountable, but give them a little bit of help. Talk to your lumberyard about how your lumber is being delivered. We were picking on trim, how that trim is being delivered. If I've got a packet for that shelving package, I want that kind of packaged by itself, wrapped up and ready to go. So it's easy to grab that package and take it into a room. Is your trim coming for all your doors, or all those legs coming as just 16-foot lineals, or are you buying the pieces? So Dave mentioned scopes of work. Add scopes of work in for deliveries.
Yeah, and sub-banding that delivery is really important.
What's that, Chuck? We
Agreed.
couldn't hear you very well.
Oh, sub-banding that material in the delivery is really important to help make sure that the material goes where it's supposed to go.
Yep.
And I have one other question for Dave and Ed. A key person in the communication from us to the framer, us to the trade, is my superintendent. How do I get my superintendent to be serious about this?
How do you get the superintendent to do what?
To be
To
serious.
be so, Chuck's question is, how do I get the superintendent to take this seriously? Literally, I think it was. I've been on the road so much, I'm losing track. But I was just in Fort Benning, Georgia, with a bunch of superintendents, and the president of the division had me do a little impromptu in the morning, and we discussed that. First of all, was this group of superintendents really didn't understand the economics of what we're talking about here. So first is I want to educate them on the dollars. And depending what your system you're on, I want to start tracking those variances and share with that superintendent. So in this group, we've been watching the superintendents getting younger and younger. And our most recent superintendent seminar in Denver was 3.8 years in the business. Once I took out the 2 long tenured, it was 1.8 years. So a lot of it is education and communication, and then show them how to walk a house, how to go approach a trade. So a younger superintendent, by the way, can be very intimidated by a trade who's got far more experience than him. So in my opinion is I got to educate them on the dollars, educate them on how to walk the product, educate them if they have to on how to talk to a trade, and then start sharing the metrics with them. In the seminars, we start talking about how to share the metrics on variances, and can I sort it variances by superintendent? And the answer is yes. So the first part for me is really educating them on the dollars and cents. It's not just about building the house. When we talk about the superintendents, we talk about its quality and its price and its time. They're the 3 pieces that they need to manage.
Yeah, and that's really the production manager's responsibility.
Agreed.
We have another comment from Wes, who says, if you hold them accountable, they will become more communicative of errors you may be making as well, rather than just send you a list of what they need.
Agreed. And one of the things that the builder will work with right now with the superintendents is teaching them it's not us against them, it's we. We have to work on it together as a team.
Yep. We have one last question, and that's going to pretty much bring us to the end. We're almost at the top of the hour here. Last question is from Anthony. He wants to know how you hold trades like framers accountable in the current labor market. If you try to make them pay for the material may have misused, they tend to just walk off, leaving you empty-handed with very small pool of skilled, reliable framers to pick from as replacements.
Anthony, you're not wrong. However, once I start educating them, again, my first instinct isn't to go back charge them. My first instinct is to show them how to use it. And if you used Dave to do an estimate for a house, I can tell you the first thing that's going to happen is the first house they frame is going to be short. Again, education, communication, that's all important. I think for the most case, if I can get a framer to come in, do the job and get out. So Anthony, one of my things is if I'm doing 2-foot on centers or framing a certain technique, I'm actually on these highly efficient framing techniques, it's actually faster to do it my way than it is to do it his way. So if I educate him on this is going to actually save him time and money, I've got a better shot. I don't start out back charging, by the way, at all. I agree with you. But if I have to work with them, and now the framers have got a year. In fact, I was just talking to my framer the other day. It's been a year since they've been getting beat up about lumber. It's not new. So if your framer, if this is new to him, you better have an 80-20 rule in place and have other framers in the background. So, me being a past framer, I'm hard on framers, but my framers love working for me. I never have a problem. Why? Because I educate them the process. My lumber gets delivered properly. The details are on there. And on a custom home I got coming up, we're meeting in 2 weeks to review everything down to lumber. If it's an 8-day house, I want him to get in and out and make money. Hopefully that answers the question, but I agree with you. It is not easy these days. It's all on us, by the way, for the education and communication.
All right. Well, I want to thank all of you for joining us today to discuss waste. And I hope you guys got a lot out of the information that was shared by both Dave and Ed. If you need to get a hold of either one of them, you have my email address. You can reach Dave at dburley@myboq.com, or you can reach Ed at ed@builderpartnerships.com. Thank you again for joining us today. We look forward to seeing you next Wednesday. We have another webinar. Have a great week, and we'll see you all next week. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.